Since it's 10 years, just an anniversary for us, but also obviously we're 10 years from the Paris Agreement. There has been a lot of change over the decade, but how has that demonstrated? What has happened in your sector, in the construction sector? What has been the greatest progress, and where do you see that not enough change has happened?
10 years ago, if we're being honest with ourselves, 10 years ago in construction, sustainability would have been very much on the periphery. It's a nice to have. If the client asks for it, we'll do it. Very much in the what has been termed the fluffy space. It's the thing that you do when times are great, and when times are tough, it's the first thing that goes. And construction over the last 10 years has rapidly moved from sustainability being periphery to now being a core part of how you run your business. And that's not to say that we've cracked it and we've figured it all out, but Balfour Beatty in particular, about 3 years ago made the very bold decision to place a significant investment in growing its in-house sustainability expertise. We now have an in-house energy management unit. We have a materials management unit. We have in-house carbon experts, and we have an in-house natural environment team. All of this expertise coming together alongside, I should mention as well, our social impact team to fundamentally ensure that as a business we understand exactly what we need to be doing. What are the most material considerations that we've got to address, because we can't do everything, whilst equally offering that expertise to our clients. Because regardless of industry, trying to transition any established business into becoming a sustainable organization, which is not as straightforward as just saying I'm going to be low carbon. There's so many other factors that go into that mix of what it means to be a sustainable business. It's not easy to navigate, and for us, making sure that we have the right in-house expertise so that we can truly turn around to our customers and say, we are that expert and trusted organization that can lead you through this and help you navigate this agenda. Right. And we've seen that across the sector. So shifting from periphery to business as usual.
To more core decision making.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what are the sort of like the biggest challenge that you face when it comes to creating that sort of like sustainable approach and sustainable business model in the sort of construction sector? And you specifically, what would you say are for your company the biggest priorities, as the most immediate priority to address, whether it's a sort of a program initiative? What is on top of your mind?
Energy. Energy, because we are the largest construction company in the UK, and we are a critical partner to government, and we are delivering for the UK a lot of the sustainable infrastructure, renewable energy infrastructure, for example, that is needed in order to support the whole of the UK to transition to becoming a climate resilient country. And in order to do that, you need energy, not just for your own operations, but also to support the UK with the onboarding of renewable energy options. But in construction, the industry, the success of the industry has been built on the back of one source of energy: diesel. We know how to source it well. We know how to get it at a good price. We know how to use it. We know how to run our kit off it, and we know how to dispose of it safely. But we are now moving from an era of having a single source of fuel to now having multiple different fuel types on a project. We've got some pieces of kit that are better suited to being run off battery technology. We've got some pieces of kit that actually you can run off locally generated solar and wind. We've got some technology that needs heavier hitting fuels like responsibly sourced biodiesel or hydrogen. But this means that as a sector, what makes a good and successful project manager of the future is not just an individual that, understands how to engineer an asset and how to deliver an asset on time and to the program specifications. It's also somebody that is energy savvy, energy conscious, somebody that can look at the profile of their project and say, right, I've got all of these pieces of kit. I know I'm going to need battery power for my handheld tools. I'm going to need hydrogen for my light commercial vehicles, my heavy goods vehicles, and then I'm going to go back to battery for my big pieces of plant kit, for example. And that's a very different landscape from what we've had before. Construction is known for being, it's got a very established workforce. We've got individuals that have been in construction a very long time, and they're leaning into an awful lot of change, and it's coming at them very, very quickly.
So is it that also like creating challenges in terms of, finding the right employees or equipping them with the right skills? Are you facing some of the sort of skills gaps as well?
Absolutely. I mean, it is about equipping them with the right skills. The construction sector, one of our strategic priorities is around employment. We have got more work coming in than individuals available to build it, and that's an industry-wide problem. Then you layer on top of that the fact that in construction, we have got an aging workforce. It tends to be an older population. We are competing against other industries for the young engineers, the young generation coming through. That in and of itself is why it's so important for the construction sector to be really actively communicating with the younger generations around, look, we at this moment in time, we are a hard to abate sector, but you can have maximum impact coming into this sector. A 1% saving on carbon emissions in construction is more than most people will generate in their lifetime if they're working in other sectors where their carbon profile is nowhere near the size of ours. So it's trying to get that messaging across, and yes, upskilling our employees, but also making it as straightforward and easy as possible. And one of the things that has been discussed today, actually, as part of some of the collaborative discussions, is the fact that sustainability, the language around sustainability is still a bit alienating. It is, when you're talking about, an individual that might be a procurement manager or somebody that's in comms or somebody that's in commercial or quality or, a quantity surveyor, we've got to break it down and make it really easy for people to understand what have they got, what role do they play and what have they got to do to make a difference.
Right. And do you see that changing? Is there the sort of language around sustainability and clarity of, what the roles are, etc.?
That was something for us that was a game changer, because last year we relaunched or evolved our sustainability strategy, which we call Building New Futures. And one of the cornerstones of it was, we are not going to view sustainability as an environmentalist movement. We're actually going to view it as a business movement. Because if we want to be a profitable, successful, resilient business 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now, Balfour Beatty is more than 110 years old. We've got to be a sustainable business. If we're not that, we're not going to be in business. So we started to frame everything that we were doing and integrate sustainable concepts and translate them into the language of business. Set KPIs that were commercial KPIs, and start to understand, the perspectives of our key stakeholders and put sustainability in their language. And it has been challenging. There's been moments where we thought we've got it right, message hasn't quite landed, but we've circled back and tried again. But that transitioning of sustainability away from being just about environmentalism to actually being a core business movement in the language of business, measured using commercial terms, has been a game changer.
Right. And I guess that is a sort of almost necessary requirement for mobilizing the necessary funding, right, and the investment into these solutions and processes.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, the responsibility of a publicly listed organization is to generate a return for its investors, and you want to generate a return sustainably, but you've got to be able to articulate the return on investment of what you want to do. because otherwise, again, you're not going to get your financial community on board if you're not able to articulate that.
Right. And what role does regulation play in that, in sort of making some of these solutions more commercially and viable or cost effective? What's the role of regulations?
It's interesting you mentioned regulation, because I think the regulatory landscape at this moment in time is extremely crowded. There's an awful lot of ESG frameworks that organizations have to respond to, and I would personally argue that we are tipping into organizations now having to spend more time and most importantly dedicate more resource, whether that be human power, AI power or funding, into responding to ESG frameworks where they simply, where they have to articulate what they should be doing, rather than actually turning those resources into doing what we need to do. Organizations reporting on progress in a transparent and open manner is important. But what we've got now is multiple ESG frameworks that all ask the same question in a slightly different way. If you're a global business like we are, you're going to have your ESG frameworks across all of your geographies that again you have to respond to. There needs to be some form of streamlining around all of these ESG reporting frameworks. We need regulation, but it needs to be well thought out, and it needs to be an enabler of action. At this moment in time, it's just tell us what you're doing, and we're sort of, for me, I would argue, I can spend the next 30 years endlessly telling you what we want to do, but I would like the frameworks to free up the time to allow people to do the actual doing.
What, in your view, is the sort of future of the built environment? Because obviously we do need to build more. We need to build differently. How do you see the sort of outlook for the built environment, and why is it important for that sort of more holistic change in terms of decarbonization of the economies more broadly?
Yeah, so the industry actually published a white paper not that long ago, sort of calling for the DCO and the application process to be streamlined and simplified, because at the moment it is layers and layers and layers and layers of paperwork. And again, you go back to the asset that we're trying to build has got to be responsibly built. It's not just about it being low carbon. You've got to take into account the impact on the local community. You've got to take into account the ethical and responsible sourcing of the materials that are going into the asset. And you've got to take into account the impact on the natural environment as well. The DCO process at this moment in time is so sort of convoluted that I think we kind of end up losing sight of that a little bit. Right. And then by the time some of our clients get to the point of being able to build, so much money has been lost in the planning system that you think, well, that money could have been used to invest in, for example, biodiversity net gain initiatives, or it could have been used to invest in local community initiatives. Like, it could have been better spent. Right. Sensible enabling regulation is always critical, but I feel at the moment it is overly complex. Right. Three factors really. Projects that have a diverse portfolio of energy, renewable energy sources that they're drawing on, as well as, I'm going to say, transparent around how sustainable an energy source actually is, because there isn't a fully sustainable source today. There's trade-offs. Right. When you look at the holistic supply chain.
And how does that feed into the sort of bigger question of climate resilience or resilience of infrastructure, of constructions. Is that a part of your thinking around how do we build infrastructure and build environment that is resilient to
Absolutely.
extreme weather events, etc.?
Absolutely. I mean, we were one of the first signatories to the Nature Positive Pledge, because you're never going to create a stable or resilient climate without a healthy biosystem. It's just not going to happen. The two are intricately linked. And for us, in terms of we've got strategic design partners and also very forward-looking clients, that when we look at the assets that we're building, we have to look at them and say, right, this asset's going to be placed in this location. The flood profile of this location might be, it might have a certain flood profile, or if we look at it in the context of potential heat waves, all of that has to be taken into account now. But again, the bigger question is getting back to how do we create that stable environment, and we're not going to do it by just pursuing net zero. We must also protect our natural environment. And within the UK, I think we're up to 90% now. We in terms of our biodiversity, we've lost 90% of it. We're one of the worst performing countries across Europe for biodiversity restoration. So we've really got to get our skates on in that area.
Because obviously construction on some level is national, but it's always local, right? With local impact.
Absolutely.
So how do you build those sort of coalitions and coordination between the national, the local? How do you bring people on board, whether it's businesses or local communities?
Well, we have an approach that we call, think global, act local, and it is about involving and actively communicating with local community members, because if you're trying to build an asset and the local community are upset about it, they can cause delays, which then just simply creates costs for everybody, that's trying to create the asset. So I think it's we have as part of our project teams, we have community engagement officers, we have customer service officers, things like that. Those individuals that are there specifically to engage with the local community, to hear their concerns. And again, there have been some projects recently, Junction 10 M25, for example, there was a extensive consultation process between National Highways, ourselves, and the local community to try and mitigate as far as possible, the disruption to the area, and act on the concerns of local community individuals. I mean, we're never going to be able to do everything, but at least we're having a proactive dialogue and trying to do something.
And so just to finish on, obviously I said that this is the sort of 10th anniversary, but looking forward in sort of the next decade, is there any change that you would like to see happening, that if we meet again in 10 years' time, you would say that, yes, we have achieved something absolutely fundamental for that global transition? Is there anything particularly important that you would want to see happen?
I think we all acknowledge that we've got to go faster. And the way that we go faster is by pointing investment and removing the blockers and allowing the money to flow in the right direction. And I think, there's a lot of money that's thrown at innovations. We're very good at, we are an island of entrepreneurs. We are very good at discovering and designing the initial innovation. But what then comes after that is you've got to create the market, you've got to build the market, build the demand to pull through the supply, and it's that bit that we are not as quick at or as good at as we need to be. So new technologies, new innovations, new ways of working, regardless of sector, it's taking us as a species too long to transition from, we know what technology we need, we've created it, now we need to pull it through the supply chain into the actual B2C dynamic.
Right, so the actual adoption.
Exactly, when you look at an innovation curve and you think about, your early adopters, and then as you move into your early majority, your late majority, we've got to go a lot quicker on that curve. And whereas I feel that we still get stuck in the arguments of, why should we do this? And it has to be an argument of, why wouldn't we do this? And how do we do it? And I think that is, truly one cultural requirement that does set Balfour Beatty apart. You know, a cornerstone of our culture, because we are a business of engineers, entrepreneurs, is an attitude of how can we do this? How are we going to bring this about?
Right.
And we need more of that.
Absolutely. Let's hope we'll get there in less than 10 years.
Ideally.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joanna Gilroy. It has been fantastic talking to you, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.